Welcome back, you beautiful anomaly, you walking contradiction, you impossible equation they keep trying to solve with the wrong formula. Stop for a second and look around. Feel that shift? It isn't your imagination. You didn't chase attention. Attention started chasing you. While others copied yesterday, you quietly became tomorrow. The energy you carry is changing conversations before you even speak. People notice your confidence, question your silence, and imitate your courage without realizing it. You are no longer following the wave. You are the wave. Today, we're exposing why your influence is growing so fast and why the world can no longer pretend you don't exist. Most people spend their lives asking for permission to become who they already are. They wait for approval, applause, recognition, or validation before taking the next step. They measure their worth by the number of people who agree with them. They shape their personalities around acceptance because rejection feels unbearable. But somewhere along your journey, something changed. You stopped treating approval as a destination. You realized that the crowd changes its opinion every single day. But your purpose cannot afford that kind of instability. The moment you stopped begging to be accepted, you unknowingly became the person others began studying. That is how influence is born. Not through performance, but through certainty. People don't always admire confidence immediately. At first, they question it, they criticize it, they label it as arrogance because genuine self-belief exposes the insecurity hiding inside those who depend on external praise. When someone sees you standing firm without needing constant reassurance, it forces them to confront everything they have been avoiding about themselves. That discomfort often turns into gossip, judgment, or resistance. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your existence silently challenges the limits they have accepted for themselves. Have you noticed how people suddenly start using your ideas after laughing at them first? They dismiss your habits, mock your discipline, and question your decisions. Then, months later, they quietly adopt the same behaviors without mentioning where they learned them. They don't want to admit you influenced them because doing so would require acknowledging that they underestimated you. Pride keeps their mouths closed, but their actions reveal the truth. Influence doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives disguised as imitation. There is something powerful about consistency that people rarely understand. Anyone can create excitement for a day. Anyone can appear motivated for a week, but showing up with the same determination when nobody is watching creates a different kind of energy. It sends a message that your commitment isn't dependent on an audience. That level of discipline becomes magnetic because it is so uncommon. Most people chase temporary emotions. Very few develop permanent habits. Those habits become your identity, and identities are far more contagious than motivational speeches. Watch carefully how conversations change when you enter a room. Some people become inspired. Others become uncomfortable. A few suddenly become quieter. None of those reactions are random. Human beings constantly compare themselves with the energy around them. Your confidence reminds some people of their own potential, while reminding others of the excuses they've repeated for years. The difference isn't your behavior. The difference is their mindset. The same light that guides one person can expose another person's fear. This is why becoming the standard is often a lonely experience before it becomes an admired one. When you refuse to lower your expectations, you naturally separate yourself from people who are comfortable staying average. They may accuse you of changing. They may claim you've become distant. In reality, your standards simply stop negotiating with mediocrity. Growth creates distance, not because you're trying to leave people behind, but because not everyone chooses to grow at the same speed. The fascinating part is that the people who once doubted you begin watching you more closely than the people who believed in you. They monitor your progress, analyze your decisions, and pay attention to your failures because they desperately want proof that your confidence was misplaced. Instead, they keep finding evidence that your progress wasn't luck. Every challenge you survive strengthens your credibility. Every setback you overcome makes your influence harder to dismiss. Without realizing it, your critics become your most loyal observers. The world has always rewarded those who define themselves before society attempts to define them. If you don't write your own story, someone else gladly will. They will assign limits, labels, and expectations that were never yours to carry. But once you stop accepting those borrowed identities, everything begins to shift. Your decisions become clearer. Your words carry more weight. Your silence becomes more powerful than other people's arguments because it comes from conviction rather than fear. That's when something remarkable happens. People stop asking whether you're qualified to lead and start asking how you developed such certainty. They begin seeking your perspective because they recognize something they cannot manufacture overnight. Authentic influence cannot be purchased, borrowed, or copied. It is earned through countless unseen moments when you chose discipline over comfort, purpose over popularity, and truth over approval. While everyone else remained trapped in the exhausting cycle of trying to fit into trends, you quietly became the standard that future trends would eventually follow. There is a strange kind of power that never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with loud speeches, dramatic entrances, or desperate attempts to be noticed. It moves quietly, almost invisibly, yet it changes everything around it. That is the kind of energy you carry now. You may not see it every day because you live inside your own mind, but the people around you experience it differently. They notice subtle changes in themselves after spending time with you. They begin questioning old beliefs, reconsidering their excuses, and imagining possibilities they had buried long ago. Your presence becomes a mirror that reflects not who they are, but who they could become. Energy has always been more contagious than words. Think about how quickly fear spreads through a crowd, or how one confident person can calm an entire room without saying much. Human beings constantly absorb emotional signals from the people around them. Most never realize they are doing it. They simply walk away feeling different without understanding why. When your mindset becomes rooted in purpose instead of panic, that emotional stability begins influencing everyone who crosses your path. Some people leave feeling stronger. Others leave feeling challenged. Either way, nobody walks away completely unchanged. The fascinating part is that influence often happens in silence. You don't have to convince people to respect discipline when they repeatedly watch. You remain committed. You don't have to explain resilience when they see you continue moving forward after setbacks that would have stopped someone else. Your actions slowly become louder than anyone else's opinions. Every decision you make sends an invisible message. Every habit becomes evidence. Every moment you refuse to compromise your values teaches people something they cannot learn from motivational quotes alone. Have you ever noticed how people start changing their behavior around someone they secretly admire? They sit a little straighter. They think more carefully before speaking. They become more aware of how they present themselves. That isn't coincidence. Deep inside, people naturally adjust their standards when they encounter someone who embodies consistency. They may never admit that you inspired the change, but inspiration rarely asks for recognition. It simply leaves fingerprints on other people's lives. This is why some individuals feel uncomfortable around you without any clear reason. Your energy quietly interrupts the stories they tell themselves. Someone who constantly complains begins realizing how much time they waste after seeing you focus on solutions. Someone addicted to excuses starts noticing how often they avoid responsibility. Someone pretending to be confident feels exposed when they encounter genuine confidence that doesn't need attention. You never intended to challenge them, but your example does it automatically. Authenticity has a way of exposing performance. Many people mistake influence for popularity, but they are completely different. Popularity depends on being liked. Influence depends on being remembered. Popularity disappears when attention moves elsewhere. Influence continues working long after you've left the room. The most powerful people are not always the loudest voices. Often, they are the calmest minds. They create change simply because others begin thinking differently after encountering them. That kind of impact cannot be measured by applause. It is measured by transformation. There will always be people who resist your energy because accepting it would require changing themselves. Instead of growing, they choose criticism. Instead of learning, they search for flaws. Instead of admitting they feel inspired, they convince themselves they dislike you. Yet even their resistance proves your influence exists. Nobody spends energy trying to tear down something they truly believe is insignificant. The intensity of their reaction often reveals the strength of the impact you've had on them. Meanwhile, others are quietly watching from a distance. They may never introduce themselves or tell you how much your example helped them. They observe how you handle disappointment, how you remain composed under pressure, how you refuse to let temporary failures define your future. Without realizing it, you become permission for them to believe they can change too. Sometimes your greatest contribution to another person's life is simply proving that discipline, courage, and self-respect are still possible in a world filled with distractions. The remarkable truth is that real influence grows naturally when you stop trying to impress people. The more authentic you become, the more your energy begins reshaping the environment around you. Conversations shift because of your perspective. Standards rise because of your example. Confidence spreads because of your consistency. Even people who never intended to follow your path find themselves adopting pieces of your mindset. That is how lasting influence works. It doesn't force change through pressure. It awakens change through example, quietly rewiring the people around you until they begin seeing the world and themselves through an entirely different lens than they ever imagined possible. Every new idea begins as an inconvenience to the people who have grown comfortable with the old way of thinking. History has repeated this pattern more times than anyone can count. Before something becomes normal, it is questioned. Before it is respected, it is criticized. Before it is celebrated, it is resisted. The world has never welcomed change with open arms because change demands that people abandon certainty, and certainty is where most people choose to live. That is why becoming different is rarely rewarded in the beginning. It is tested first. The moment you begin thinking beyond accepted limits, you unintentionally disturb those who built their identity around those limits. They are not necessarily bad people. They are simply protecting the version of reality that makes them feel safe. When someone steps outside the invisible boundaries everyone else accepted, it creates a silent question inside every observer. If that person can do it, what excuse do I have? Instead of answering that uncomfortable question, many choose to reject the person asking it without saying a single word. This is why your ideas may have been ignored when you first shared them. Your vision may have sounded unrealistic. Your confidence may have appeared strange. Your discipline may have seemed unnecessary. People often confuse unfamiliarity with impossibility. If they have never seen something before, they assume it cannot work. Their imagination is limited by their experience, while yours is guided by possibility. That difference is enough to create resistance long before it creates admiration. Look closely at every trend people obsess over today. At one point, someone laughed at it, someone dismissed it, someone confidently declared it would never succeed. The crowd has an interesting habit of rejecting what it eventually embraces. They rarely recognize greatness in its earliest stages because greatness doesn't resemble popularity when it is still growing. It looks like isolation. It looks like uncertainty. It looks like one person continuing to believe while everyone else watches with doubt. Your journey follows the same pattern. There were moments when your choices confused the people around you. They couldn't understand why you refused to settle. They questioned why you stayed disciplined when shortcuts appeared easier. They wondered why you remained patient while everyone else chased instant gratification. They interpreted your consistency as stubbornness because they couldn't yet see the destination your habits were building. Vision always appears irrational to people who only trust what already exists. Resistance is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives disguised as advice. Someone tells you to lower your expectations because they think they are protecting you. Someone encourages you to be realistic because your ambition makes them uncomfortable. Others suggest you stop standing out and start fitting in because conformity feels safer than individuality. They rarely realize they are asking you to abandon your future simply to preserve their present. The greatest obstacles are often wrapped in good intentions. The strange thing about influence is that it grows strongest during the seasons when almost nobody believes in it. Every challenge forces you to become more certain of who you are. Every criticism teaches you how to separate truth from noise. Every rejection strengthens your independence until your confidence no longer depends on outside agreement. That process is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. If everyone applauded you from the beginning, your identity would become dependent on applause. Instead, resistance teaches you to build your foundation on conviction. Eventually, something begins to shift. The same people who questioned your direction notice the results you quietly created. They see your consistency paying off. They recognize that your discipline wasn't temporary motivation but a permanent lifestyle. Suddenly, the conversation changes. They stop asking why you're different and begin asking how you achieved what you have. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened through countless unseen moments when you refused to abandon your standards simply because they were unpopular. By the time the world starts accepting what you've become, you have already outgrown the need for its approval. That is the irony most people never expect. The recognition they desperately chased arrives only after they stop depending on it. Confidence becomes natural because it is built on experience rather than compliments. Your influence becomes undeniable because it survived doubt before it encountered praise. Nothing feels stronger than success that was forged in solitude. Never mistake resistance for failure. Resistance often means you've stepped into territory where very few people are willing to go. Ordinary paths rarely receive criticism because they demand nothing new from anyone. Extraordinary paths challenge assumptions, expose limitations, and inspire uncomfortable reflection. That is why the world resists every meaningful trend before accepting it. The people who refuse to quit during that resistance become the ones everyone studies later, proving that yesterday's impossible idea has quietly become today's undeniable reality without ever asking permission to exist. There comes a moment when your presence begins speaking long before your voice does. You walk into a room and something changes that no one can fully explain. Conversations pause for a second. Eyes shift in your direction. Some people straighten their posture without realizing it. Others suddenly become more aware of the words they choose. It isn't because you're demanding attention. It's because you've reached a point where your character creates an atmosphere. Influence at this level is no longer about popularity or reputation. It becomes an invisible force that people experience before they understand it. Most individuals spend years trying to convince others that they matter. They chase titles, collect achievements, and seek constant recognition, believing those things create influence. But genuine influence works in the opposite direction. It doesn't begin with what people say about you. It begins with who you become when nobody is watching. The quiet decisions you make every day shape an identity that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Every promise you keep to yourself, every difficult choice you make with integrity, and every obstacle you overcome without losing your principles adds another layer to a presence that cannot be faked. People are naturally drawn towards certainty because the world is full of confusion. Every day they encounter mixed opinions, endless distractions, and countless voices demanding attention. Then they meet someone whose actions consistently match their values. Someone who doesn't panic when circumstances become difficult. Someone who refuses to abandon discipline for temporary comfort. That kind of stability stands out in a culture obsessed with instant gratification. Without realizing it, people begin trusting your example more than the opinions of those who constantly change direction. Not everyone will celebrate your influence. Some will try to reduce it with criticism. Others will pretend it doesn't exist at all. They convince themselves your success is luck, your confidence is an act, or your progress is temporary. They search for flaws because admitting your growth would force them to acknowledge the excuses they continue protecting. Yet every attempt to minimize your impact only reveals how much space you occupy in their thoughts. Truly insignificant people are ignored. Those who carry undeniable influence become impossible to stop talking about, whether the conversation is supportive or critical. You may wonder why strangers seem comfortable asking for your advice, even when they barely know you. Why coworkers begin watching how you respond under pressure. Why friends quietly adopt habits they once questioned. Why family members who doubted your direction now ask for your opinion before making important decisions. None of this happens by accident. Human beings instinctively seek examples of consistency because consistency creates trust. They may not always express their admiration openly, but their behavior tells the story more honestly than their words ever could. There is also another side to influence that few people discuss. As your impact grows, expectations grow with it. Every action becomes more visible. Every decision carries greater weight. The habits that once affected only your own life begin shaping the attitudes of those observing you. That responsibility can feel heavy, but it is also evidence that your example matters. Influence is never simply about receiving attention. It is about understanding that your choices quietly give other people permission to either rise higher or remain where they are. The strongest influence is built through emotional control rather than emotional reaction. Anyone can remain calm when life is easy. The true test arrives when disappointment, betrayal, or uncertainty appears without warning. If you continue acting with wisdom while others surrender to chaos, people notice. They remember the individual who remained composed when everyone else lost control. They remember the person who solved problems instead of creating more of them. Strength expressed through calmness leaves a deeper impression than strength expressed through anger. As your influence expands, you'll notice something remarkable. Opportunities begin finding you instead of you constantly chasing them. Conversations open that never existed before. People recommend your name in rooms you've never entered. Doors unlock because your reputation arrives before you do. This isn't magic. It's the natural consequence of years spent becoming someone whose character consistently delivers value. Trust compounds just like effort does. Every honest decision, every disciplined habit, and every act of integrity quietly builds a reputation that travels farther than your physical presence ever can. Eventually, you stop worrying about whether people accept you because you've realized something far more important. Your purpose was never to fit into the crowd. It was to become a standard that challenges the crowd to grow. By the time others recognize the depth of your influence, you have already learned that true power doesn't demand attention, chase validation, or seek permission. It simply exists with unwavering confidence, shaping minds, raising standards, changing perspectives, and leaving an unforgettable impact that continues expanding long after you've moved on to the next chapter of your journey.